We're following new developments tonight on what investigators are calling a gruesome Stone County murder. Mike Lacey in the newsroom. And Mike, I know our producers just got off the phone with Stone County's coroner. What'd they find out?
David, the descriptions of how Sherry Johnson died is hard to fathom. Coroner Wayne Fleury told us someone decapitated the Stone County woman. Her body was outside her home next to a privacy fence, and her head was on the other side of that fence, some 15 to 20 feet away. Stone County deputies arrested 29-year-old Terrelle Johnson and charged him with first-degree murder. How they linked Johnson to this murder case has not yet been released. According to coroner, detectives have surgical records that now confirm Johnson's mom is the murder victim. A murderer victim. Sherry Johnson lived at this home in Stone County. She was a 51-year-old counselor at Hattiesburg High School. We're told detectives went to her home on Johnson Road Wednesday to perform a welfare check because no one heard from her for a few days. What they found was as gruesome as anything the coroner says he's ever seen. The coroner believes Mrs. Johnson might have been strangled. He noticed fractures in her neck area, indicating some sort of force was applied. The coroner also told us investigators recovered 2 weapons and sent them to the state crime lab. An autopsy report with more information about Mrs. Johnson's death should be available on
I used my hands, my teeth, and a butter knife. These were the chilling words Terrelle Johnson spoke to investigators when describing how he decapitated his own mother, Sherry Johnson. In June 2018, what began as an argument over credit cards in a quiet Mississippi home ended in one of the most horrific acts of violence imaginable, a son taking his mother's life in a manner so brutal that even hardened law enforcement officers were left stunned. When Stone County Sheriff's deputies arrived at Sherry Johnson's home for a routine welfare check, they discovered a scene that defied comprehension. Blood splattered throughout the bedroom, a body in the backyard, and 15 feet away, behind a privacy fence, the severed head of a woman who had dedicated her entire life to helping others. But who was Sherry Johnson? To the countless students at Hattiesburg High School, she wasn't just another staff member. She was their lifeline, their confidant, their champion. As a guidance counselor, Sherry had an extraordinary gift for seeing potential in students when they couldn't see it themselves. Her office door was always open, her compassionate smile ready to greet anyone who needed direction, support, or simply a listening ear. She saved my life, one former student would later testify. When I was ready to give up on everything, Mrs. Johnson was the only one who believed in me. Stories like this weren't rare. They were Sherry's legacy, woven through the lives of generations of students who passed through her office. The brutal contrast between Sherry's life of service and her violent death sent shockwaves through both Hattiesburg and Wiggins communities. How could someone murder the woman who had touched so many lives with kindness? And how could that someone be her only son, the very person she had raised, supported, and continued to help even as he struggled to find his way as an adult? Perhaps most disturbing was Terrelle's apparent lack of remorse. After the killing, he told police he moved his mother's body outside so it wouldn't stink up the house. This callous statement hinted at a psychological disconnect that would later become central to his court case. What transforms a son into someone capable of such violence against his own mother? What invisible line was crossed in that household that day? And could anyone have seen the warning signs before it was too late? Have you ever wondered what could drive someone to commit such an unthinkable act against their own mother? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and like this video if you want more in-depth true crime cases. The story of Sherry Johnson's murder isn't just about the shocking details of her death. It's about understanding the complex, often hidden dynamics of family violence and the devastating consequences when those tensions explode into the unimaginable. While Sherry Johnson dedicated her life to guiding troubled youth, her own son Terrelle was fighting battles that would eventually lead to tragedy. As a young man seeking direction, Terrelle enlisted in the United States Army, a decision that initially seemed to provide the structure and purpose he needed. His military service represented a period of stability, a time when his path appeared to be straightening. However, Terrelle's transition back to civilian life proved challenging. Unlike many veterans who successfully reintegrate into society, he struggled to find his footing after leaving the military. The disciplined environment of the Army had temporarily masked underlying issues that resurfaced once that structure disappeared. When he first came back from the service, he seemed different, a neighbor would later tell investigators. More withdrawn, less the outgoing kid we knew before. Something had changed in him. This change manifested in a troubling pattern of employment instability. Terrelle drifted between jobs, unable to maintain steady work. He would secure positions only to lose them weeks or months later. Former employers described him as unreliable, sometimes failing to show up without explanation, other times displaying concerning behavior that made co-workers uncomfortable. One former co-worker noted he'd be fine one day, then the next he'd be angry over something minor. You never knew which version of Terrelle you'd get. As his professional life faltered, Terrelle's financial independence crumbled. Like many parents faced with an adult child in crisis, Sherry opened her home to him. The Stone County house became their shared residence, a mother continuing to support her struggling son despite his advancing age. This arrangement, born from maternal love and concern, inadvertently created a pressure cooker environment where tensions could build without escape. Financial strain became a recurring source of conflict. Terrelle, unable to contribute consistently to household expenses, reportedly began using his mother's credit cards without permission. These unauthorized charges led to arguments that grew increasingly heated over time. Friends of Sherry noted concerning changes in her demeanor during this period. The normally upbeat counselor seemed more reserved when discussing her home life. She began canceling social engagements, offering vague explanations about needing to handle things at home. She never directly complained about Terrelle, one friend recalled. But there was this heaviness about her when his name came up. Looking back, I wish I'd pushed harder to understand what was happening. Perhaps most telling were the subtle security measures Sherry implemented. A lockbox appeared on her bedroom door. Important documents were moved to a safe deposit box at her bank. She began having private conversations with her brother about financial matters, conversations that deliberately excluded Terrelle. These precautions suggest Sherry recognized potential danger, even if she couldn't acknowledge its full extent. As a guidance counselor trained to identify troubled behavior, she likely recognized warning signs in her son, but found herself caught in the impossible position of many parents, trying to help a child while also protecting herself. The community that knew Terrelle as a child described him as quiet, but not obviously troubled. His high school teachers remembered him as average, neither excelling nor failing, neither popular nor isolated. This unremarkable adolescence gave no indication of the violence he would later commit. What remains unclear is whether Terrelle's military service exposed him to trauma that contributed to his later behavior, or if he had always harbored violent tendencies that were simply well concealed. What is clear is that the man who returned to Wiggins, Mississippi, was struggling with issues that went far beyond normal readjustment difficulties. As Terrelle's personal struggles deepened and his financial dependence on his mother increased, the stage was being set for the confrontation that would ultimately end in unimaginable violence, a mother's compassion becoming the very thing that kept her in harm's way. June 6, 2018 began like any other Wednesday in Wiggins, Mississippi. The summer heat had settled in early that year, with temperatures climbing into the high 80s by mid-morning. Inside Sherry Johnson's modest Stone County home, there was no indication that this ordinary day would end in tragedy. What we know about the events comes primarily from Terrelle Johnson's own confession, pieced together with physical evidence from a crime scene. The timeline reveals how quickly a domestic disagreement can escalate into violence when underlying tensions reach a breaking point. According to investigators, Sherry returned home from work that afternoon to discover new, unauthorized charges on her credit card statement. This wasn't the first time such charges had appeared, and previous discussions with Terrelle about financial boundaries had clearly failed to resolve the issue. The argument was about credit cards. Terrelle would later tell detectives in a flat, emotionless tone that disturbed even experienced interrogators. She was upset about money. For Sherry, these unauthorized charges represented more than just financial strain. They symbolized a fundamental breach of trust. As a single mother who had worked tirelessly to maintain financial stability while raising her son, she had specific rules about household finances. The recurring credit card issues suggested Terrelle either couldn't or wouldn't respect these boundaries. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices from the Johnson home around 5:30 p.m., unusual for the typically quiet household. One neighbor described hearing a woman's voice saying something about the last time and consequences, though they couldn't make out the full conversation. Inside, the confrontation was escalating beyond previous arguments. Sherry, according to Terrelle's statement, threatened to evict him if the financial violations continued. This ultimatum, the potential loss of his housing, appears to have been the catalyst that transformed an argument into something far more dangerous. She kept pushing me about the money, Terrelle stated during his confession. She wouldn't stop. What happened next reveals how quickly anger can transform into violence when restraint fails. Terrelle admitted to physically attacking his mother, first striking her repeatedly. As the assault continued, he began choking her until she lost consciousness. The medical examiner would later confirm that this strangulation alone would have been fatal. But the violence didn't end there. In a state that Terrelle's defense attorney would later characterize as a psychotic break, he took the attack to an unimaginable level. Using a common butter knife from the kitchen, not a weapon brought to the scene with premeditation, but an ordinary household item, he began the gruesome process of decapitation. When the knife proved insufficient for the task, Terrelle admitted to using his hands and teeth to complete the act. This detail, perhaps the most disturbing element of the case, suggests a level of rage that transcended rational thought. "I didn't want her to stink up the house," he explained when asked why he moved her body to the backyard after the killing. This callous statement, devoid of remorse or recognition of the horror of his actions, would later become key evidence in the prosecution's case against claims of temporary insanity. The physical evidence at the scene told the story of a prolonged attack. Blood spatter analysis indicated the assault began in the living room, continued through the hallway, and culminated in Sherry's bedroom. The extensive blood evidence throughout multiple rooms of the house suggested Sherry had attempted to escape the attack, moving from room to room as she fought for her life. After completing the killing, Terrelle made no attempt to flee or report what had happened. Instead, he remained in the home for several days, going about his routine while his mother's body lay in the backyard. He made no calls, sought no help, and showed no outward signs of distress. It wasn't until June 10th, 4 days after the murder, that anyone realized something was wrong. Sherry's brother, concerned after not hearing from his sister for several days, requested a welfare check. When deputies arrived at the home, they found Terrelle calm and initially cooperative. It was only when they began searching the property that the horrific truth was discovered. What do you think pushes someone over the edge like this? Are there warning signs society should be more aware of? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you're finding this case analysis valuable, consider subscribing for more in-depth crime stories. The credit card dispute that triggered this violence wasn't unique. Families argue about finances every day without ending in bloodshed. What transformed this common disagreement into a brutal murder? Was it a momentary explosion of rage, a calculated act of violence, or the culmination of long-simmering resentment? The answers to these questions would become central to understanding not just what happened in that Stone County home, but why it happened and whether it could have been prevented. By June 10, 2018, 4 days had passed since anyone had heard from Sherry Johnson. Her absence from work, uncharacteristic for the dedicated counselor who rarely missed a day, had raised concerns among colleagues. Text messages went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. For those who knew Sherry's reliable nature, the silence was deafening. It was her brother who finally took action. After multiple failed attempts to reach his sister, he contacted the Stone County Sheriff's Department to request a welfare check. His concern was straightforward. This wasn't like Sherry. Something was wrong. Deputies arrived at the modest home outside Wiggins around mid-morning. The property appeared quiet, with nothing externally suggesting the horror that awaited them. When they knocked on the door, it was Terrelle who answered, calm, composed, showing no signs of distress or anxiety. He was completely normal, one deputy would later testify. Made small talk about the weather, asked why we were there. Nothing about his demeanor suggested anything was amiss. The deputies explained they were checking on Sherry at her brother's request. Terrelle informed them his mother wasn't home, suggesting she might be running errands. When asked when he had last seen her, his answers became vague and inconsistent. This inconsistency, coupled with the deputies' training to look for signs of deception, prompted them to request permission to look around the property. Terrelle consented to the search, a decision that would quickly lead to his arrest. As one deputy entered the home, he immediately noticed something concerning: small blood droplets on the living room floor. Following this trail, more blood was discovered in the hallway, with significant splatter in the bedroom. The pattern suggested a violent struggle had occurred inside the home. The investigation took a grim turn when deputies moved their search to the backyard. There, partially concealed behind a shed, they discovered Sherry Johnson's decapitated body. Approximately 15 feet away, behind a privacy fence, they located her severed head. The scene was so disturbing that several officers, veterans with years of experience, needed to step away to compose themselves. Terrelle was immediately detained and transported to the Stone County Sheriff's Department for questioning. During the initial interview, Investigators noted his unusual demeanor. He showed no emotional reaction when informed they had found his mother's remains. There were no tears, no shock, no denial, just a flat effect that experienced interrogators found deeply unsettling. After being read his Miranda rights, Terrelle made a decision that stunned investigators. He chose to confess immediately without requesting an attorney. What followed was one of the most disturbing confessions in Mississippi criminal history. "I killed my mother," he stated plainly, as if discussing an everyday occurrence. "We got into an argument about credit cards." The lead detective, expecting denials or minimization, was taken aback by Terrelle's forthright admission. As the interview continued, Terrelle provided details that matched the physical evidence at the scene. He described beating his mother severely, then choking her until she stopped breathing. When asked about the decapitation, a detail investigators had deliberately withheld to test his knowledge of the crime, Terrelle described using a butter knife from a kitchen drawer. When the knife proved inadequate for the task, he admitted to using his hands and teeth to complete the decapitation. "I didn't want her to stink up the house," he explained when asked why he moved the body outside. This statement, delivered without emotion, would later become key evidence of his state of mind at the time of the killing. Forensic teams processed the home over the next 48 hours, documenting blood evidence throughout multiple rooms. The pattern confirmed Terrelle's account of a prolonged attack that moved through different areas of the house. DNA testing confirmed all blood belonged to Sherry Johnson. The medical examiner's report provided the final pieces of the puzzle. Sherry had died from strangulation, with the decapitation occurring post-mortem. Defensive wounds on her arms and hands indicated she had fought desperately for her life before succumbing to the attack. As news of the murder spread through Wiggins and Hattiesburg, communities struggled to reconcile the horrific crime with the quiet, unremarkable young man many had known since childhood. Former classmates expressed shock, unable to connect the Terrelle they remembered with the brutal crime he had confessed to committing. For investigators, the case presented an unusual challenge, not in solving who had committed the crime, but in understanding why. With Terrelle's immediate confession, the question shifted from who to how. How could a son commit such violence against his mother? This question would become central as the case moved toward trial. The Stone County Courthouse stood as a monument to small-town justice, a place where local disputes and minor offenses were typically adjudicated. But in the fall of 2018, its weathered walls contained a case of unprecedented brutality as Terrelle Johnson faced trial for the murder of his mother, Sherry Johnson. From the beginning, the legal proceedings took unexpected turns. During his initial court appearance, Terrelle made a spontaneous statement to reporters, "I done it." This unprompted confession, made outside the structured environment of police interrogation, further complicated his attorney's ability to mount an effective defense. Despite the overwhelming evidence and Terrelle's own admissions, his defense attorney pursued the only strategy that seemed viable, an insanity defense. The attorney argued that Terrelle had been in a psychotic state during the killing, potentially exacerbated by drug use, rendering him unable to distinguish right from wrong or understand the nature of his actions. "My client was not in his right mind when this tragedy occurred," the defense attorney told the court during opening statements. The level of violence, the nature of the act itself, speaks to someone disconnected from reality. To support this claim, the defense called a psychologist who testified about Terrelle's mental state, suggesting he suffered from undiagnosed conditions that, when combined with possible substance abuse, created a perfect storm of psychological dysfunction. The expert pointed to the extreme nature of the violence and Terrelle's bizarre behavior afterward, remaining in the home with his mother's body in the yard, as evidence of his detachment from reality. The prosecution, however, methodically dismantled this defense. They presented evidence that Terrelle had taken specific actions to conceal aspects of a crime, moving the body outside, placing the head behind a privacy fence, and cleaning up some of the blood. These actions, they argued, demonstrated awareness that what he had done was wrong. "These are not the actions of someone who doesn't understand reality," the prosecutor told the jury. "These are the actions of someone who knows exactly what they've done and is trying to hide it." Perhaps most damaging to the insanity defense was Terrelle's own confession. The prosecution played the recorded interview, allowing jurors to hear his matter-of-fact description of the killing and his callous explanation for moving the body. His flat effect and lack of remorse during the interview contrasted sharply with the defense's portrayal of a man lost in psychosis. The prosecution also presented financial evidence showing a pattern of unauthorized credit card use and highlighted the life insurance policy worth $150,000 that named Terrelle as beneficiary. While they stopped short of claiming the insurance was the sole motive, they suggested it represented a potential financial incentive that Terrelle was aware of. After 3 days of testimony, the case went to the jury. Their deliberation was remarkably brief, just 18 minutes. This unusually short deliberation time signaled the jury's certainty about the evidence presented. They returned with a unanimous verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. When asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Terrelle remained silent, offering no explanation, no apology, no final statement to the community or to his mother's memory. The judge, noting the heinous nature of the crime and the defendant's apparent lack of remorse, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the maximum penalty available under Mississippi law. As Terrelle was led from the courtroom, Sherry's colleagues from Hattiesburg High School embraced each other, many wearing purple ribbons, Sherry's favorite color, in her memory. Her brother, who had initiated the welfare check that discovered the crime, sat quietly, his face revealing the complex emotions of seeing justice served while still grappling with the loss of his sister, and in many ways, his nephew as well. For the communities of Wiggins and Hattiesburg, the conclusion of the trial brought legal closure but left many questions unanswered. The swift verdict and sentencing marked the end of the judicial process, but for those who knew Sherry Johnson, the impact of her loss and the incomprehensible way she was taken would continue to reverberate. The murder of Sherry Johnson represents a devastating example of familial homicide, a crime that often occurs with warning signs that go unrecognized until it's too late. Research shows that adult sons are among the most common perpetrators in family murders, frequently following patterns of escalating conflict and control. In Sherry's case, several warning signs were present. Terrelle's increasing financial dependence, his unauthorized use of her credit cards, the installation of locks on her bedroom door, and her growing reluctance to discuss home life with friends. These subtle indicators of trouble were visible but not recognized as precursors to violence. Experts note that financial control often precedes physical violence in domestic situations. When combined with other risk factors, such as Terrelle's employment instability and possible untreated mental health issues, the danger increases significantly. For families experiencing similar dynamics, resources exist but remain underutilized. Crisis intervention services, financial counseling, and adult protective services can provide crucial support before situations escalate to violence. Many communities offer temporary housing options for family members who need to separate during periods of high tension. This tragic case reminds us that violence can hide behind closed doors. What state or country are you watching from, and are there resources available in your area for families in crisis? Let me know in the comments, like this video if you found it informative, and subscribe to Crime Scene Exposed for more cases that help us understand and prevent these tragedies.